I was arranging roses in the crystal vase when my husband walked into our kitchen and said, with a smile I'd never seen before, "Elena, I need to tell you something. I've found her. I've finally found the woman I'm meant to be with." I looked at him. Then at the roses, then back at him. I placed the vase down slowly, very slowly, on the marble countertop. And I smiled, just as slowly. "Is that so?" I said. "Before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you where I'm calling in from. I'm curious about you too. Please, take a moment and comment below. Where are you watching from, and how old are you? I read every single comment, I promise. Your stories matter to me. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how I got to that moment in the kitchen, how a successful architect became a full-time caregiver, how 23 years of marriage led to that smile. My name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm 42 years old. I was born in El Salvador, came to the United States when I was 7, and worked my way through architecture school on scholarships and night shifts at a diner. By the time I was 35, I had designed 2 museums and a performing arts center that won national awards, magazine features, speaking invitations, a corner office in San Francisco with views of the Golden Gate Bridge. That's when I met David Chen. He was 38, running a tech startup from a cramped office in Soma. Brilliant, ambitious, kind, or so I thought. We married within a year. I was 36, he was 39. His mother, Margaret, didn't come to the wedding. She said she had the flu. I found out later she just didn't approve of her son marrying some immigrant architect. But I tried. God, how I tried. Margaret Chen had been a feminist activist in the 70s. She'd marched for the ERA, organized protests, helped women get into law school and medical school. She had framed newspaper clippings on her walls. She'd raised David alone after his father left when David was 3. She was proud. She was strong. She was impossible. And 3 years into our marriage, she was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. She was only 68. David fell apart. He was her only child. She'd sacrificed everything for him, he said. We couldn't put her in a facility, he said. She'd rather die than be warehoused with strangers, he said. So I made the decision. I told David I'd take a sabbatical from work. 6 months, I said. We'd hire help, I said. We'd figure it out, I said. That was 17 years ago. Margaret moved into our 4-bedroom Craftsman in Noe Valley, the house I'd fallen in love with because of its natural light, perfect for an architect's home office. The house where I'd planned to raise children, though that conversation got postponed year after year after year. The first year was manageable. Margaret could still dress herself, still recognized us, most days. I worked from home, took freelance projects I could do remotely. David's startup was gaining traction. He was gone 12, 14, 16 hours a day. But he was building something, he said. For us, he said. For our future, he said. Year 2. Margaret started wandering. I installed locks on all the doors, smart locks that would alert my phone if she tried to leave. I hired a part-time aide, Rosa, to come 3 days a week. I took fewer projects. Then no projects at all. Year 3. Margaret stopped recognizing me. She thought I was the housekeeper. She'd speak to me in Mandarin, which I don't speak, then get angry when I didn't understand. She'd accuse me of stealing her jewelry, her money, her son's love. David would come home late, exhausted, and say, "She doesn't mean it. It's the disease. Please, Elena, please be patient." And I was patient. Because I loved him. Because I believed in us. Because he'd held me when my father died. Because he'd celebrated every one of my professional victories. Because when I'd shown him my designs, he'd looked at them the way other people look at art. Or so I thought. Year 5. David's startup got acquired. $52 million. He came home with champagne and said, "We did it, baby. We're set for life. You'll never have to worry about anything again." He kissed me in front of Margaret, who looked right through me. That night, I asked if maybe, now that we had resources, we could hire full-time care for Margaret, get some of our life back, maybe even talk about that family we'd planned. He looked hurt. "Elena," he said, "Mom raised me alone, worked 3 jobs, never complained. And you want to ship her off now that we can afford to give her dignity?" So I stayed, and the years folded into each other like origami, creasing and refolding until I couldn't remember the original shape. Year 7. Margaret needed round-the-clock care. I converted my home office, the one with the perfect north light, into a hospital room. Rosa came every day now. I slept on a cot in Margaret's room most nights because she'd wake up screaming, confused, terrified. David started traveling for business. New York, Seattle, Austin, London. Year 10. I stopped looking in mirrors. When did I last go to a salon? When did I last buy clothes that weren't just comfortable? When did I stop being Elena Rodriguez, award-winning architect, and become just the woman who managed Margaret's medications, Margaret's meals, Margaret's moods? Year 15. David stopped touching me. Not dramatically, just gradually. A kiss on the cheek instead of the lips. Sitting a little farther away on the couch. Going to bed after I was already asleep. Coming home after I was already awake. I told myself it was stress. The business, the pressure, his mother's decline. But here's what I didn't tell anyone. Not even Rosa. I knew. Somewhere deep down, in that part of me that used to design buildings and solve complex spatial problems, I knew something was structurally wrong with my marriage. So, in year 16, I started paying attention. David had a new phone. He said his company required it for security. He changed his passwords. He said it was company policy after a breach. He started going to the gym at 5 a.m. He said he needed to de-stress before work. And there were emails. He'd leave his laptop open sometimes, and I'd see names I didn't recognize in his calendar. Dinner meeting with Nicole, coffee with Nicole, strategy session with Nicole. Nicole Martinez, 28 years old, marketing director at David's current venture, a new startup he'd launched with the acquisition money, Stanford MBA. Her LinkedIn photo showed a woman with perfect teeth and confident eyes. Her Instagram was a catalog of artisan coffee, hiking photos, and carefully curated book spines. I hired a private investigator. His name was James Wu, and he had an office in the Tenderloin that smelled like old paper and strong coffee. It cost me $8,000, money I took from a joint account that I rarely checked anymore. James came back with photos 3 weeks later. David and Nicole at the restaurant we went to for our 5th anniversary. David and Nicole at the boutique hotel in Sausalito. David and Nicole looking at each other the way David used to look at my architectural drawings. But that wasn't the worst part. James found financial documents. David had created a new company, registered in Delaware, Chen Ventures LLC. Nicole was listed as a 50% shareholder. David had been moving money, lots of money, into accounts under this company's name, money from our joint investments, money that was supposed to be ours. "Mrs. Chen," James had said, his voice gentle, "I've seen this before. He's preparing for divorce. He's hiding assets. By the time you hire a lawyer, there'll be nothing left but debt from your mother-in-law's care." I sat in that coffee-scented office and felt something I hadn't felt in 17 years. Clarity. The same clarity I used to feel when I'd finally solve a design problem, when I'd see exactly how the structure needed to be. I didn't cry. I smiled, and I said, "Tell me everything I need to know about property law in California." That was 3 months ago. 3 months of planning, 3 months of documents, consultations, and careful moves. 3 months of acting like nothing had changed, of smiling at David over dinner, of listening to Margaret call me terrible names, of living in a house that felt like a prison I'd built for myself. Until this morning, when David walked into the kitchen with that smile and said he'd found the woman he was meant to be with. "Nicole's different, Elena," he said. He was wearing the suit I'd helped him pick out for investor meetings. $3,000. I'd paid for half of it with money from a freelance consultation I'd done secretly, desperately trying to contribute something. She's ambitious. She's driven. She doesn't need my money. She has her own career. She's not a caregiver? I offered. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I walked to the kitchen table, where my laptop sat closed. "David, I need you to look at something." "Elena, I know this is hard, but look at the screen, David." I opened the laptop. It showed a document. Official. Legal. Lots of words in that specific language lawyers use. "What is this?" he asked. "That," I said, "is a deed transfer and zoning variance application. As of 7 a.m. this morning, this house is no longer residential property. It's a registered medical care facility, specifically a memory care facility specializing in Alzheimer's patients." He stared at the screen. "What? You remember how I studied architecture? Turns out architects know quite a bit about property law, zoning regulations, ADA requirements. And remember Rosa? She's actually a licensed nurse, and she has 3 colleagues who just finished their certifications." I pulled up another document. "This is the business registration for Rodriguez Memory Care Center. I'm the founder and CEO. We've already got our first client." I gestured toward the room where Margaret was sleeping. "And we've got investors interested. Apparently, there's a huge demand for culturally sensitive, small-scale memory care in San Francisco." David's face had gone white. "You can't do this. This is our house." "Was our house," I corrected. "The deed was in my name. Remember? You put it in my name for tax purposes back in year 2. Your accountant's idea. This is insane. I'll fight this. You'll what?" I opened a third document. These are the financial records James Wu compiled. Chen Ventures, LLC. 52% of our joint investment money moved into an account with Nicole Martinez as co-owner. That's called asset hiding, David. Also called fraud. In California, a community property state. I stood up and walked to the coffee maker, poured myself a cup. My hands were steady. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to move out. Today, you have 3 hours. This property is now zoned for medical use only. Non-residents aren't allowed to live here without proper licensing and background checks." I checked. Nicole doesn't have those. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, David. Maybe Nicole's apartment? The one in Mission Bay with the view of the bay? The one you've been paying rent for through Chen Ventures? His mouth opened. Closed. "Or maybe," I continued, "you could go to your investors. Tell them you need money." "Oh, wait, you can't, because when this gets out, when they find out you've been committing financial fraud, hiding marital assets, they're going to pull their funding faster than you can say Series B." "Elena, please. I talked to your board yesterday, anonymously, of course. Sent them some documents. They're voting on your position as CEO tomorrow morning. I'm betting they're going to ask for your resignation. Fraud tends to make investors nervous." "You're destroying my life." And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. "No," I said quietly, "I'm reclaiming mine." I walked to the window. Outside, there was a coming soon sign I'd had installed this morning. Rodriguez Memory Care Center, compassionate care with dignity. You took 17 years of my life, David. My career, my dreams, my body, because I stopped sleeping in a real bed. My identity, because I became just the caregiver. And you know what the funny thing is? I did it out of love, real love, the kind where you sacrifice because you want to build something together. I turned to face him. "But you weren't building with me. You were using me, using my labor, my time, my devotion, so you could build your empire while I cleaned up your mother's messes. Literally, my mother needed care. Your mother needed professional care in a facility equipped for her needs. What she got was a DIY solution that destroyed your wife. But that was fine with you, because I was convenient, free, available. And when you found someone more exciting, someone who didn't smell like adult diapers and hand sanitizer, someone who had her own ambitions, you decided to trade me in. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I finished my coffee. Now get out of my facility. You're trespassing." "What about Mom?" "Margaret," I said, "will have the best care available. Round-the-clock nurses, music therapy, art therapy, everything I've researched and learned over 17 years. She'll have dignity, which is more than you gave either of us. You can't afford this. Where are you getting the money?" I smiled. "Remember that museum project I designed 12 years ago, the one that won the national award? It turns out I retained the intellectual property rights. The museum wants to expand. They reached out 6 months ago. They're paying me $450,000 as a consulting fee, plus royalties on the design. And I'm using every penny to build something real, something that matters. A care facility that treats patients like people. 400, you've been planning this for 6 months? Longer, actually. Since the day I realized you'd stopped wearing your wedding ring to the office. That was 8 months ago. I opened the front door. 3 hours, David. Then I'm calling the police and having you removed for violating medical facility residential codes. He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd only ever seen the convenient version of me. The one who said yes. The one who shrank. The one who stayed quiet. Elena, he said, and his voice cracked. We were married for 23 years. 23 years. You can't just throw that away. And that's when I laughed. Actually laughed. David, I said, you threw it away when you moved Nicole into the hotel we stayed at for our honeymoon, when you gave her the credit card that was supposed to be for Margaret's medical expenses, when you started a company with her using money that was supposed to be ours. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just cleaning up the mess. He left. It took him 4 hours, not 3, but he left. With suitcases and boxes and the bewildered look of a man who's just realized he's not the protagonist of his own story, Nicole texted him while he was packing. I know because his phone was on the counter and I glanced at it. Baby, where are you? I'm at the house waiting. The realtor wants to show us the Pack Heights condo. So they'd been house hunting. Using what money, I wondered? Oh, right. My money. That was 2 months ago. Let me tell you what's happened since. Chen Ventures collapsed. The board forced David to resign after the financial documents went public. Nicole left him 3 days later. Apparently, she was more interested in ambitious David than unemployed David. She's now dating one of the investors. I saw it on Instagram. David tried to fight the facility designation. His lawyer filed injunctions, appeals, complaints. They all got dismissed. Turns out when you follow the law exactly, when you have an architect who knows building codes and a nurse who knows healthcare regulations, you can transform a residential property into a care facility completely legally. We opened Rodriguez Memory Care Center 6 weeks ago. We have 4 patients now. Margaret is one of them. The others are 2 women and a man whose families couldn't afford traditional facilities but wanted something better than the warehouse-style nursing homes. And something strange happened with Margaret. On good days, her clear days, she looks at me and says, Elena, just my name. But she says it with recognition, with something that might be gratitude. She held my hand last week and said, thank you. Maybe the disease is giving her clarity about what matters. Maybe she's just confused. I don't know. But I'm giving her the best care I can. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because it's the right thing to do. As for me, I'm designing again. The facility itself is my portfolio piece. I've been contacted by 3 families who want me to consult on converting their homes into similar small-scale care centers. I'm writing articles for architecture and healthcare journals about aging-in-place design. I'm speaking at conferences. Last week, a producer reached out about a documentary, The Architect Who Redesigned Elder Care. I haven't decided yet. I hired Rosa full-time. She's my director of nursing. She hired her colleagues. We're training 2 more nurses. We're creating jobs. We're changing lives. My corner office in San Francisco, someone else has it now. But I have something better. I have a purpose. I have my name back. Elena Rodriguez. Not David's wife, not Margaret's caregiver. Just me. David called last week. He's working at a startup, junior position, fraction of his old salary. He wanted to know if we could talk. Really talk, he said. I said no. He wanted to know if there was any chance, any possibility, that we could work things out. I said, David, you taught me something valuable. You taught me that I was waiting for permission to be myself, permission to matter, permission to take up space. I don't need that permission anymore. I give it to myself. He cried. Actually cried. Said he'd made a mistake. Said Nicole meant nothing. Said he loved me. Had always loved me. Just got confused. Just got scared of aging. Just wanted to feel young again. I said, I understand. But understanding doesn't mean forgiving. And forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. And none of it means going back. He asked. What about 23 years? Doesn't that count for something? I said, yes, it counts as 23 years I survived, and now I'm going to spend the next 23 years living. So that's my story. The story of how I went from invisible to visible, from doormat to door opener, from wife to CEO. People ask me if I'm angry. The answer is no. Anger is what you feel when you're surprised. I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. People ask me if I'm sad. Sometimes. Mostly for the woman I was at 36, standing at her own wedding, believing that love meant shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's dream. But mostly, I'm proud. Proud of every blueprint I draw now. Proud of every patient we help. Proud of the woman I see in the mirror these days, the one with gray in her hair and lines around her eyes and hands that shake sometimes from exhaustion. She's real. She's whole. She's mine. Last month, on what would have been our 24th anniversary, I treated myself to dinner at that restaurant, the one David took Nicole to. I ordered the most expensive wine. I sat alone at a table with a view of the city lights, and I raised my glass to myself, to the woman who got out, to the woman who built something from rubble, to the architect who redesigned her own life. If you're reading this, if you're watching this, and you feel invisible in your own life, let me tell you something. You're not invisible. You're just being looked at by people who've forgotten how to see. But you can see yourself. And that's where it starts, with one decision, one moment, one smile in a kitchen when your whole world is ending and beginning at the same time. 3 months from now, I'm giving a TEDx talk. The title is Designing for the Displaced: How Caregivers Can Reclaim Their Architecture. I'm going to talk about building codes and zoning laws and how the structure of our lives isn't fixed. How we can renovate, rebuild, redesign. And I'm going to talk about Margaret and Rosa and the 4 patients who trust us with their last chapters. And I'm going to talk about David because his story matters too, as a warning. But mostly, I'm going to talk about that moment in the kitchen, that moment when I could have screamed or cried or begged, that moment when instead I smiled, because that smile, that wasn't surrender, that was recognition. That was me seeing clearly for the first time in 17 years. That was the blueprint for everything that came after. Now tell me, where are you watching from? How old are you? And have you ever had a moment where everything changed with a single smile? I want to hear your story. Every single one of you, because your stories, they matter just as much as mine.